The title of this presentation is Lessons Learned, Intercultural Education Through Children's Fiction and Picture Books. My name is Kay Livingston. I am from the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and I am making this presentation on behalf of myself and my colleague Margarida Morgado from Instituto Politécnico de Castelo Branco, Escola Superior de Educação in Portugal. We would like to thank Maria del Carmen Arou Ribeiro from the Instituto Politécnico de Guarda, Portugal, who reviewed our presentation. In this presentation, we will provide a snapshot of the range of studies and projects that we have learned from over the years. Some of these were funded by the European Commission and the Treaty of Windsor between Portugal and the UK over a period of 20 plus years. They illustrate the shifts in intercultural education, children's fiction, and in interrelationships between them over that period. Although we draw from a range of projects, and the list is provided in the appendix at the end of this presentation, that shaped our thinking on how to promote intercultural education through children's fiction, for the purpose of this presentation, we will draw mainly from two project examples, and our analysis is based on them. One is a comparative intercultural education project between Scotland and Portugal, and another a visual literacy and intercultural education project. Over the 20 years of our involvement in leading and participating in intercultural education projects, we have been aware of a shift in emphasis and understanding of intercultural education. Our work began by using children's fiction to promote intercultural education. Our second set of projects was about collecting examples of children's fiction from several countries to use in developing intercultural education. Our third set of projects was about the recognition of the growing importance of visual literacy, and our studies sought to use visual literacy to promote intercultural education. And more recently, our projects have combined all of our experiences to integrate the use of appropriate children's fiction with teacher self-development and understanding of pupils' own cultural perspectives, and teachers and pupils co-constructing intercultural knowledge and meaning. Alongside the development of our understanding of the use of children's fiction to develop intercultural education, we have identified challenges in understanding of key concepts in a shifting world. A key challenge is the changing interpretation of concepts such as intercultural and multicultural as society becomes more diverse. This has to do not only with the opposition of the prefixes multi and inter, but also with how culture is defined. Through our work in teacher education, we have seen a shift from a multicultural approach, that is, accepting diversity and multiple representation in books on the diversity that can be found around us, to an intercultural approach that suggests the inclusion of the teachers' and children's own appreciations of diverse material and the negotiation of meanings between what is generally accepted or preferred and new meanings that emerge from their own experiences and their need to understand the unexpected, the strange, and the unfamiliar. A further shift has occurred in relation to seeing culture as a set of practices that are homogeneous and fixed in time and place, that is, a national culture or a canon of great books, to views of culture as continuously shifting and linked to processes of how individuals relate to the world around them and seek to define their identities that are never stable, negotiate conflicting representations of reality, and are able to integrate these in particular continuums of time and space. Cultures are complex realities framed by many discourses, holding a multiplicity of cultural positions and exhibiting many intersections of social practice. This is, on the one hand, views about intercultural education that are about recognising and accepting the diversity of contemporary societies and their implications for better or worse, and being able to negotiate your way through. And on the other hand, more political views that claim that every young person from any cultural and social group should be able to find himself fairly represented in the literature and simultaneously acquire the knowledge and competences to live in diverse societies, be valued as a democratic human being, and be prepared to share power with others. In the intercultural education and multicultural education area, authors like James Banks 2009 and others have reclaimed the need to educate children as multicultural citizens by rendering visible the various ethnic, racial, linguistic and religious groups that have been underrepresented in schools and societies, and by articulating the duties and rights of those groups towards the nation, democracy and human rights. When translated into the children's literature area, this has mostly meant the inclusion of books that represent the social experiences of marginal groups in society, conflicting race relations, and a rewriting of history through works of fiction that seek a fair and equal politics of representation across gender, race, ethnicity, class, and ability terms. Another challenge is to understand how children's books have been used for the promotion of intercultural education and how this has involved a shift from a literary to a cultural studies, critical pedagogy perspective, and a constructivist view on how books should be read in the intercultural classroom. Children's fiction can assist children in understanding processes of cultural identification, who they are, where they live, what they believe in, the ways in which they see themselves and the world. Through fiction, they can explore perceptions of reality that are common and uncommon to them and which confirm their perceptions of the possible. Children's fiction can also enable them to explore perceptions of fantasy, the strange, and the impossible. In this way, children's fiction offers opportunities for negotiation between the observable world, people's cultural perspectives, and readers' emotional responses. I'm now going to draw from the first of the two specific projects to explore these opportunities for understanding of intercultural education and to give you an insight into how we used children's fiction to explore these concepts. The first project was called Creatures from the Sea. It was funded by the Treaty of Windsor in 2005. The project had a common theme of the sea. It used a selection of children's books from two countries, which were Scotland and Portugal. The project aimed to raise teachers' and pupils' understanding of difference, tolerance, and acceptance of the other. The theme of the sea not only connects the two European cultures, but offers the possibility of promoting intercultural education. Stories of the sea are frequently stories about an other, whose strangeness is difficult to accept, who keeps to his or her own tradition, habits, and otherness. Sea stories are often about local discrimination, inclusion and exclusion, and disparagement. In addition, they can be about boundary crossing and its implication for people and places. To give you some further examples, analysis of the text showed the use of symbolic and metaphorical text to explore ethical, ideological, and social themes. For example, seduction, fear, acceptance, refusal, independence of cultures. Specifically, those who live in the sea and those who live from the sea, such as fishermen and mermaid. Power structures such as rich and poor, man and woman, human and non-human. Misrepresentation of those we do not know, treatment of newcomers, the consequences of boundary crossing, and social and cultural forms of resistance, along with oppressive discrimination. Through the analysis of the project outcomes and the analysis of the selection of texts, we recognise that the stories in themselves cannot be presented as models of intercultural relations. Rather, they present narrative spaces for the development of a critical attitude to representations of otherness, misinterpretations, stereotyping, and simplification. We also recognise that the mediation of educators sensitive to intercultural education is necessary. It is important that they are able to provide pupils with meaningful reading experiences and offer alternative ways of reflecting on the meeting of cultures and helping to shape the subjectivity of the readers. Children should be encouraged to see how cultural codes and systems of representation within which they generally operate influence their ways of seeing. The books did offer a cross-cultural perspective, in that books from one culture were used in a different culture. For example, the Scottish books were used in Portugal and vice versa. The teachers had to support pupils to explore difference in interpretation through discussion and negotiation. During the discussion of the text, it became obvious that some things could not be understood fully without mediation, for example, cultural specific identities, and this enabled stereotypical perspectives to be questioned and discussed. Children's books, caught as they are between art, literature and education, are complex artefacts through which to focus on cultural encounters, because they may be explored for what they are thought to represent and for the ways in which particular reading communities and individuals in particular cultural contexts make sense of them. These cultural encounters may be represented in manifold ways, historically and spatially, and though they constitute supranational concerns in a globalised world, they are also the result of situated cultural beliefs, values and practices. Culture encounters in fiction can be productively used to help children, teachers and societies to reappraise their own norms, values and cultural patterns in a time of constant change, to provide creative solutions and frameworks for people to adapt to ever-growing complex and multidimensional cultural encounters in contexts of, for example, global migration. The literature on cultural difference and diversity has frequently addressed cultural change through cultural encounters. However, this cannot be achieved solely through academic analysis and interpretations. To be useful for the identity formation of children, these interpretations and meanings need to be open to negotiation and interpretation. One way to explore this problem of meaning-making from textual analysis is to link academy to education through academic readings and empirical study. In moving from the selection and critique of texts to application with children and adolescents in practice, and to its cultural analysis, children's fiction can help young people identify processes of transformation and the development of new cultural understandings and identities, as well as involve them in meaning-making and action. A problem we have identified that should be addressed is the mismatch between critical interpretations of books and audience inclination to negotiate messages in complex ways. The education sector is a significant stakeholder in what concerns the consumption of reading materials for children, but often remains attached to traditional views, interpretations and approaches to literature on the periphery of current academic debates and developments that concern the potential of children's literature to reflect, shape, inform, reproduce and distribute, as well as construct, negotiate and transform worldviews, cultural attitudes, beliefs and identities. Comparative studies in children's literature are well documented in O'Sullivan 2005, who claims that we have recently witnessed an interdisciplinary cultural studies turn that has redefined the field. The main lessons from projects like Creatures from the Sea is the notion of using children's fiction for a particular educational purpose. Texts acquire and possess meaning in terms of how we use them. So the basic proposition is radically different, that we do not need specific books on diversity in order to promote intercultural education. Books have the potential to be read for intercultural education if readers are willing to use them for that purpose. It is not necessary to search for new books that explicitly represent the theme of intercultural dialogue, migration, refugees, racism, gender inequalities, cultural conflict, democracy and social justice issues, or any other relevant intercultural theme. Many books will encapsulate these themes in possibly less obvious ways, though still relevant for children to learn about intercultural issues, attitudes and skills. However, it is necessary that readers engage with their reading in a critical way that involves deconstructing ideologies of the text, seeking an alternative involvement of the reader with the text, learning to see in different ways from their own habitual strategies, and relating what they learn to their own social conditions of living. I will now draw from our second project entitled Visual Literacy and Intercultural European Education. This project was funded by the European Commission. The project concerned the development of visual literacy as necessary for the development of intercultural competence in a world that has become more visual. This implies shifting the focus to ways of reading as cultural practices that may help educators guide young readers to engage with cultural diversity and develop intercultural competences to deal with complex intercultural interactions. We focused on developing a model for critical guided reading. It does not necessarily require the substitution of lists of books by other lists that are politically more correct, in that they include experiences of racial and ethnic others or represent other ways of life. Intercultural education using children's literature depends on how literature is read and how the communities all over the world expect particular books to be produced and consumed. The idea behind the notion of deconstruction and critical reading is to create new routines for reading that call attention to particular ways of meaning making using new questions, perspectives or alternative protocols of looking and reading. This kind of reading might partially be described as reading against the grain, which Temple et al. Quoted in Medusa and Rees 2001 define as a way to examine the unexamined, question the unquestioned, and hold up to scrutiny the unspoken assertions the text is making about the way lives are lived in society. The project was primarily concerned with pictures in picture books and with the development of teachers' visual literacy skills through the use of materials that can help learners decode pictures and analyse them in meaningful ways as a first step in developing skills of encoding pictures and visuals as a tool for communication and learning. The project focused on the cultural diversity of Europe and with the need to learn to see the point of view of others so as to more effectively communicate with them. It was predicated on children and teachers as situated viewers who will bring to each picture their own particular historical social construction and will create multiple meanings of representations which originate from their own histories and ways of understanding the world they live in. At the centre of the process was helping teachers to look afresh at pictures in children's fiction, looking, connected, developing cultural awareness of what it is we are looking at, giving an opinion of what we think it is, but trying to discover something that they did not see at first. Looking can become a quest for meaning and a process of thinking about representation. This process becomes easier if there is dialogue between children and the teacher, and also if they experiment with forms and manipulate and change the picture, cut, replace or draw. The next step is to wonder, to reflect and understand how meaning has been created from looking. This can be done by imagining how it could have been done differently or by connecting knowledge they already possess with something new or unexpected. Based on how readers and viewers make meaning, the frame we proposed was a simple set of 4 questions to be asked in relation to each book. What do you see? What does it mean? What can you use it for? How could you read it differently? These 4 questions describe a network of associated activities to reading a text or picture in a picture book that may be successfully accumulated during reading in the classroom. In the first stage, connected to the question, "What do you see, read?" readers' processes of meaning-making involve deciphering, discovering, understanding, and connecting to previous experience and knowledge. During the second stage, "What does it mean?" activities of thinking, imagining, wondering come into place to deepen first impressions. The third question, "What may you use it for?" engages opinion, talking, dialogue, connecting own opinions to others, and thus bringing meaning-making from text into the terrain of children's own feelings and experience. While the last question, "How could you use it differently?" generates all the previous activities, plus learning about own culture, experimenting with alternative meanings, decentering of previous assumptions, and discovering hidden or subtle meanings. The emphasis is put on negotiating meaning rather than on the notion of diversity and multiplicity of cultures, with the concomitant implication that we favour the comparison between cultures, the creation of spaces of intersection between cultures, rather than collections of books from several cultural origins, or about different world places, or by authors from several linguistic and cultural backgrounds. Early confrontation with cultures through texts that represent realities that are different from the viewer's own may provide an awareness of anti-discriminatory processes. The metacognitive strategy of self-reflection that can be developed through contact with diversity, especially when combined with the acquisition of new knowledge that promotes the decentering of dominant social constructions, willingness to engage with and integrate different cultures, may be similarly stimulated by asking the reader to give an alternative meaning to that he gave initially, induced by all the narrative strategies put in place by the text and by his customary behaviour and habits. The issue here is how to approach a visual text and how to make sense of it. People gain meaning in a number of different ways. Although visual text communicates some meaning to everyone, part of its meaning is culturally specific and requires learning and teaching. From the point of view of intercultural education, it's necessary to explore the manner of representation, visual clues, intended and unintended meaning, expected viewer emotional responses, and the cultural context of production and reception. What became clear as we worked with teachers during the projects is that the teachers themselves had to uncover, confront, and reflect on their own constructions of meaning from the text. As they began to use the interpretive frameworks and see the potential for intercultural learning, they also began to question their own held views about difference, for example. The teachers needed support to uncover their own deeply held values and beliefs, and reflect on the impact they had on their own readings of children's fiction and their classroom pedagogies. The teachers had to understand themselves as learners and recognise they had to construct and reconstruct their own understanding as society changes and as their own classrooms change with greater diversity of learners. Greater diversity in the classroom offers opportunities for everyone to learn, but this needs new pedagogical approaches that recognise and give legitimacy to multiple voices. The teachers, the pupils, their parents, and members of the community who can offer their interpretations of children's fiction to provide rich opportunities to explore different readings and interpretations from different worldviews. An interpretive framework provides structure for dialogue and offers openings to uncover and explore different meanings and reconstruct and co-construct new meanings. The seeds of change that we identified were the uncovering of assumptions, recognizing diverse and sometimes conflicting representations of the world, generating resources of hope to rethink the world, and negotiating and creating new meaning and ways of living and being. The key messages that we offer from this analysis of our projects was teachers and pupils reimagining identity, shifting from single stable understanding of identity to multiple dynamic understanding of identities. The new resources and materials were developed that enable new understanding of shifting identities in a globalized, interconnected and technological world. In parallel, we noted the need for shifting pedagogical approaches in the classroom. These new pedagogical approaches were about moving from teachers as knowledgeable experts, transmitting cultural information, to multiple voices and perspectives in the classroom, with pupils, teachers and community co-constructing meaning through interaction. The next slide provides the references that we have used in this presentation. The next slide is the appendix that gives you an indication of the range of projects that we were involved in, although we focused specifically on only two. And the final